When have you said, "That's not my name"? I was working as a temp at this huge law firm downtown, just answering phones and filing papers. On my third day, this well-dressed woman storms into the lobby and demands to speak with Linda immediately. I told her there were like 6 Lindas working here and asked which department she needed. She rolled her eyes and said, "Linda from the Morrison divorce case, obviously." I had no idea what she was talking about, but I called upstairs to check. Turns out the Linda she wanted was Linda Walsh, a senior partner who handled high-profile divorces. But here's where things got weird. When I called Linda Walsh's office, her secretary said she'd been out sick all week with pneumonia. The woman in the lobby, let's call her Patricia, started getting really agitated. She said Linda had been texting her all morning about meeting today to discuss some urgent evidence in her divorce. I explained that Linda Walsh was definitely not here and suggested maybe there was some confusion. Patricia pulls out her phone and shows me a whole text thread with someone claiming to be Linda Walsh. The messages were telling her to bring cash, important documents, and to come alone to discuss sensitive matters about her husband's affair. My stomach dropped. This had scam written all over it, but Patricia was convinced she was texting with her actual lawyer. I called Linda Walsh's direct line just to double check. Her voicemail confirmed she'd been sick since Monday and wouldn't be back until next week. Meanwhile, Patricia was getting more upset, saying Linda was probably just running late. That's when my supervisor Amy walked by and I explained the situation. Amy took one look at the text messages and immediately said, "This is definitely not from our Linda Walsh. Someone's impersonating her." We tried explaining this to Patricia, but she wasn't buying it. She said Linda knew personal details about her case that only her real lawyer would know, things like her husband's business partner's name and specific dates when affairs happened. Amy suggested we call the police, but Patricia refused. She said she'd just driven 3 hours from Pittsburgh and wasn't leaving without answers. Then Patricia's phone buzzed. Another text from fake Linda saying she was waiting in the parking garage, level B2, and to come down immediately with the documents and cash. That's when Amy and I realized this wasn't just a random scam. Someone had been monitoring Patricia's real communications with her lawyer and using that information to set up this elaborate trap. We convinced Patricia to let us call the real Linda Walsh's home number. When Linda answered, she was shocked to hear about the texts. She confirmed she'd never asked Patricia to bring cash anywhere, and definitely hadn't been communicating all week. Patricia finally understood what was happening. Someone had hacked into her lawyer's email system, studied her divorce case, and was now trying to lure her to some parking garage with money and sensitive documents. But here's where the story gets really crazy. Patricia decided she wanted to catch whoever was doing this. Against all common sense, she convinced Amy to call the cops and set up a sting operation. 20 minutes later, 2 detectives arrived. They had Patricia text back saying she was on her way down to the garage, but instead of sending her, they sent an undercover officer who looked similar from a distance. The rest of us watched from the security office as the fake meeting went down. The person waiting in the parking garage wasn't some random scammer. It was Patricia's own husband, Mark. He'd been monitoring her lawyer communications, stealing sensitive information about his own divorce case, and planning to either get the evidence Patricia had gathered against him or potentially hurt her to keep her quiet. When the undercover officer approached him, Mark realized something was wrong and tried to run. But backup officers were already positioned at the garage exits. They arrested him right there on charges of identity theft, fraud, and attempted extortion. Patricia was absolutely devastated, but also relieved that she hadn't walked into that trap alone. Turns out Mark had been planning this for weeks. He'd hired a private investigator to hack into Linda Walsh's email account and had been reading all of Patricia's confidential communications with her lawyer. He knew exactly what evidence she had against him in the divorce and was getting desperate to stop her from using it in court. The really messed up part was that Mark had been acting completely normal at home while planning this whole elaborate scheme. Patricia said he'd even been bringing her flowers and cooking dinner, like nothing was wrong. The police found evidence on Mark's laptop showing he'd been researching how to delete digital evidence and had even looked up information about making people disappear permanently. Patricia's divorce case became a criminal case overnight. Mark ended up getting 5 years in prison for the hacking and fraud charges, plus additional time for stalking and making threats. Linda Walsh, the real lawyer, ended up taking Patricia's case pro bono after everything that happened. She said in 30 years of practice, she'd never seen anything that disturbing. Patricia moved out of state after the trial and started over with a new identity for safety reasons. She sends Amy and me thank you cards every year on the anniversary, saying we probably saved her life by asking the right questions. The whole thing started because I said, "That's not my name," when Patricia assumed I was Linda. Sometimes the smallest corrections can prevent the biggest disasters.